Okay, the very first thing we're going to talk about is I just want to make sure I don't click the wrong button here, is what is OARC?
Hi, everybody.
Oh, people can still see us.
Yes, they can.
It said that it had.
We're quite the pair, aren't we?
Oh boy. Okay. All right. Oh, I see. Okay. I pushed the wrong button. Bear with me. I'll do better. Anyway, first thing I want to talk about is what is OARC. And it's been around for quite some time, actually. It's 34 years. I think it's 35 actually, but it's 34 years, not-for-profit association. It's the conduit or the connection between the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and the Long-Term Care Homes Residents Councils. OARC provides a network to strengthen the voice of the residents in Ontario's long-term care homes through the resident councils, and OARC is the collective voice of long-term care homes individual residents councils. It supports and assists in the education, just like we're doing today, sustainability and effectiveness of residents councils. And OARC encourages residents to participate in decisions affecting them. It is governed by a board of directors, all of whom are residents in long-term care. And I'd like to introduce our board of directors. Here's everyone on the OARC board for 2016 to 2019. I want you to realize that they're a working board with governance as only a part of what they do. They provide guidance to OARC staff, so you can be assured that everything that is done at OARC is done from the resident's perspective. Board members present at conferences. They sit on a variety of focus groups and committees, including many Ministry of Health committees, and they co-present at education sessions held in long-term care homes for other residents, staff, and families. They are just like all other residents. They are experts about what life is really like in long-term care. We have representation here from Newmarket, Guelph, Barrie, Ottawa, Kingston, Toronto, Mississauga, and Oshawa. So a wide spread across our province. Now, when I get the opportunity to go into homes and give a presentation, we talk about the how manys, and it is basically just to give some context to the width and the breadth of long-term care in Ontario. I think sometimes it's pretty easy to be focused on your own individual home, and in some cases feel sometimes pretty isolated. But I think this might point out some really interesting things about long-term care and the homes in Ontario. My first question would be to you, and you do not have to use the chat box for this, but just think about it. In the home that you're currently living, how many people live there? Are you a big home? Are you a small home? Just think about how many people are living in your home. And it's quite interesting because often I find residents aren't too sure how many people they're sharing their home with. Second question, how many long-term care homes are in Ontario? And again, you don't have to answer. I am going to give you the answer. It's 630 approximately. We'll say 630 for today. And those homes can be varied in size, in height. I've been in very tall ones, and I've been on one-story ones. Some homes are rural homes way out in the country, way up north, down in Windsor, and in the heart of big cities. But there's 630 total. And in those 630 homes, I would then ask, to take a wild guess at how many people are actually living in long-term care across our province. And people, including myself, are usually really, really surprised when they learn that there's between 75 and 76,000 people living in those 630 long-term care homes. That's a lot of voices, a lot of voices. And of course, then the last question, and it's surprising, just about everybody gets this one, how many long-term care homes must have a residence council? And of course, the answer to that is that all long-term care homes have to. It is mandated in that act that all long-term care homes will have a residence council. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes on Long-Term Care Homes Act. You'll hear it referred to as just that. You'll hear it referred to as legislation, law. Sometimes it's just the act, or sometimes it's referred to LTCHA. It came into force on July 1st, 2010. And if you look at the hard copy of the Act, the pages of the Act, you'll note that the Act is broken into statutes, which is kind of the framework, the bones of the Act, and then regulations. And that kind of adds a little bit more on top of the statutes, more like the meat. And the reason I even am mentioning this is because we are going to look at a slide later on where you see this works together. One of the other things that is in that Long-Term Care Homes Act are the residents' rights. And think about it. Does everyone know how many rights residents have? How many are in the Residents' Bill of Rights? And the answer for that is 27. And again, that's a small change again from the way the Act used to be written. The other interesting thing about the Long-Term Care Homes Act is the preamble. And the preamble is the very, very first line of that act. And I've written it on the slide so that everyone can see it. But what it says is, the people of Ontario and their government believe in resident-centered care. Now, resident-centered care might be something that you've heard a little bit about or nothing at all. But I would like to just take a minute about resident-centered care. You'll also hear person-centered care. We are part of the long-term care community, and we're a part of the journey of change right now, and it's called a culture change. And again, they're words that you might hear in your home. 30 years ago, and I remember this well, when residents moved into long-term care, it was expected that they would conform to the rules and regulations set out by the home. Care focused on what a person couldn't do and reinforced the need for dependence on others. And slowly, slowly, this has been changing. And as I say, that's the way the Act is written now, that we're getting away from that kind of an unacceptable institutional model, and we're now moving towards a life-affirming, person-centered social model. Resident-centered care values self-determination, and that is like making your own decisions about things that are important to you. It values respect. Respect for yourself, respect between the people you live with the people who are working in the home, just a full, respectful environment. And then purposeful living. And that means there's something to look forward to, something to do, some way to be appreciated each day when you wake up. I was really fortunate to go to I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and they talked all about resident or person-centered care. And I wrote down and I share this definition all of the time. And I'm sorry, I don't remember who wrote it, but I don't think that's important. Just listen. Resident-centered care is identifying each resident. So each of those 75 or 76,000 people, recognizing them as valued human beings whose thoughts, feelings, and ideas are encouraged and valued. Pretty powerful. Now, we usually like to bring the discussion back sometimes, most of the time when we're talking to groups and that, back to what's important to residents and residents' lived experience. And as I said, with board members all living in long-term care homes, it's very easy for us to, if we don't have residents with us, to have a quote from them. And Sharon Cook is the president of OARC. She's the president of her resident council in the Newmarket home. And I know she's in the audience today. Sharon, if I could have, I would have got you to read this, but I didn't figure out how to do it, so I'm going to read it out. But this is from you, from Sharon Cook. You can have all kinds of nice things in your home, but the atmosphere and interaction with residents shows more person-centered care than material items. A friendly smile, conversation, involvement of volunteers, staff, etc., make a good home. That's all any resident will ask for, the company of a friend to talk and to listen to. Life is simple, really. And although I can't see anybody there today, often when I read that out, if I'm using it in a presentation, I will see residents' heads nodding yes, that they see that that is so, so important. And if I could see you today, I'm sure there are people there that are nodding yes, that's what resident or person-centered care is all about. I'm not taking a lot of time about the language in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, but I think it's important that it's realized that the language in the Act gives direction when it comes to talking about the home, the long-term care home, and the residence council. And language itself is a reflection of values and a precursor generally to behaviors. The relationships between councils and management of the home is not passive. And let's look at these words. It says the home shall collaborate with the resident council, consult with the resident council, have opportunities for input. Any results are communicated with resident council and seek the advice of resident council. And so these words have been taken directly out of the legislation, making reference to the active ingredients of the relationships in the home. And please look at that word seek. You know, that's a really proactive word. And it means that the home intentionally goes out to the residence council to receive input from them. Now also in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, there's language that gives direction to the residence council, and it says, advise the long-term care home. So resident council is expected to do that. Provide recommendations for the long-term care home. And review any documents that are coming in. As mentioned, the language in the Long-Term Care Home Act supports resident-centered care. Residents' opinions, value, and concerns are represented through the collective voice of Residents' Council. It's in everyone's best interest to support and invest in the Resident Council so that the truest voice, the collective voice, shines through. So let's talk about what is a residence council. What does the legislation say about a residence council? Well, the council is independent of the home, but the home supports residence council. It is not run by the home, it functions separately, yet the home assists and supports, and we'll talk about that in a little while. It's a formal advisory body. So again, check that word advisory. Remember we just said we were talking about advice. Advisory body made up of every person residing in the long-term care home. And we talked already, we mentioned the Bill of Rights. Number 20 in the Bill of Rights says every resident has the right to participate in residence council. And every person is a member of the resident council in their home as soon as they move in. Resident councils generally have regularly scheduled meetings. The meetings sometimes are once a month. Some councils take the summer off. Some councils take December off perhaps, or another busy month. Resident council decides how they would like to have the meetings scheduled, and it's up to resident council as to whether they feel it's important that the flow continue from month to month and have meetings each month. The interesting thing, the most important thing I believe to remember about the meetings is that they're safe. They are safe places for residents to come together as peers or as persons with the same living conditions to share the successes and the challenges of living within a long-term care home. Resident council meetings give opportunity for residents to come together on that regular basis and discuss any issue they think that's important enough for them to share. I do really hope that you will think about resident council, though, as much more than a monthly meeting. Let's talk about the meetings. Only residents attend the meetings. They are meetings for residents. The only other people that would attend meetings are those that are invited to attend. So if for any reason someone would want to come to a resident council meeting, they must receive an invitation and ask for an invitation to do so. In those meetings, residents discuss topics that are important to them. Resident council is a council of equals, and this is where the part comes where diplomacy and where the democratic part of council, just because people are the president or the vice president or part of the leadership team, it makes them no different than the person who perhaps doesn't even attend a meeting. But it is a council of everyone living in the home, and everyone is equal. All residents need to be remembered. And again, that's because not everyone attends the meetings. So when the meetings are happening, when discussions are taking place, it's important that all residents are there in thought. And any concerns, any suggestions, any ideas that are brought forward, it is not just about the people at the meeting, it's about everyone living in the home. And it's important that resident councils remember just that. And I'll give you an example. There was a resident council who had done some fundraising and who had raised some money, actually. And usually resident councils, again, decide on their own what their resident council would like to spend their money on. This particular council decided that they would really like to have a couple of more live music presentations in their home. And they can certainly do that. When they checked out the funds and everything, they decided they could have three. They could have 3 live music programs with actual bands coming in. But as they talked about it at resident council, what they realized that in their home, they had a unit or a neighborhood, or I'm not sure of the terminology, but they called it a secure unit. And they knew that the people that lived on that particular unit probably wouldn't be able to get down to those live concerts that they were going to have. So what they decided to do was they would have two live concerts for everybody who could attend, and with the money for that last concert that they didn't have, they would purchase a CD player and some new fresh CDs that could be played around the home and up in that secure area where those folks wouldn't perhaps get the music that was live. And so again, this is how resident council thought about those not at the meeting and used, their money and that to include them in the decisions that were made. The other thing about residents council, it's an opportunity to celebrate what's working well. It's always good to bring forward where the improvements are needed, but really good things are happening out there in your homes, and make it part of resident council to have a look and to share and to acknowledge the good things that are happening. And of course, the last thing about the meetings is the fact that resident council minutes are usually kept. So when it comes to the minutes, residents decide what is recorded in minutes. The minutes are usually approved prior to posting, and the way that's done is that resident leaders or perhaps a small group of residents review and approve minutes to ensure that the intent of the discussions was captured appropriately before they're posted. And the other thing is that the administrator has 10 calendar days to respond in writing to any advice received from residents council. And when we were talking about the legislation, in the statutes it reads, if the resident council has advised the licensee of concerns or recommendations under either paragraph 6 or 8 of subsection 1, the licensee shall, within 10 days of receiving the advice, respond to the residents council in writing. The other thing that you might want to think about, and when we talk about respectful relationships, this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about. I was probably about 3 weeks ago, I was in a home and they're telling me that they have their resident council meetings on a Friday. And I'm not sure how it all works. I know it's a Friday morning. And somehow by the end of the day on that Friday, they managed to get their minutes approved by a small group, I believe. So the minutes are now ready. They're approved and ready to either be posted if they're going to, or give to the administrator. And it's a Friday. And what happens, the administrator receives it on a Friday night, and they have Saturday, Sundays already in the mix of these 10 days. So how this group, this home worked together was they decided, yes, they'd be ready to go on the Friday as usual by the end of the day, but they wouldn't give the administrator the minutes. They wouldn't post the minutes until Monday morning. First thing, and I guess it's one of the first things they do following a meeting, is making sure then that the minutes are gone to the administrator and have been posted so that that clock of 10 calendar days starts. So again, just a good example of how through respectful relationships, a home and resident council can work very, very well together. Now the residence council assistant, and this is probably one of my favorite parts because, as I say, this was a job I did for a long time and it's very, very dear to my heart. I was talking about how the home supports resident council, although the resident council is an independent entity. And this is one of the ways it happens. The legislation says that every resident council is to have an assistant so that the resident council has help with the work that they do within their own home. The assistant is an appointment. It's an appointed position that's made by the administrator. And it has to be, that appointment going forward has to be approved by council. The assistant sometimes just isn't a good fit. Not everybody is for the role of the assistant. And if the fit isn't good for any reason, then the resident council has the right to request that the administrator appoint someone else. Again, I'll give you an example. A resident council that were going to the meetings was feeling very, very upset because apparently the discussions that were happening in their meetings were being discussed in the home, in the hallways, before the minutes were ever approved. And remember I said resident councils are to be safe places. If residents are going to talk about things that are important to them or close to their heart or whatever, they have to have a safe, trusted environment. And because there was this conversation before the conversation should have been understood or heard, they didn't feel it was a good fit. And so it ended up in that particular home that, yes, resident council did ask for a different assistant, and they did get someone who they felt very, very comfortable with. So the assistant's role, what the assistant does in the home, is based entirely on the needs of the resident. And again, let me just go back. Remember I said there were 630 homes in Ontario. So there are 630 resident councils, and there are 630 assistants to residence councils. And every resident council, just like every home, is unique and different, and what one assistant might do in one home, another assistant might be doing quite a different role in another home. And in fact, those jobs or duties of the assistant can change within a month, within days sometimes, depending on what's going on. So again, the assistant's duties are assigned by council what the council needs. The assistant takes their direction from council. So when they're in the role of assistant, that is what their role is. They are no longer in their administrative job or their volunteer job or whatever their other jobs might be. Their job is to take direction from the council as the assistant. Even though assistants are often in the resident council meetings, because one of the things that the resident council may need is someone to take minutes, even if the assistants are in the resident council meetings, they are not council members, nor do they represent the administration. Confidentiality cannot be stressed enough, and it goes right back to what I was just talking about, that with confidentiality, that's how those meetings that residents have are safe, a feeling of safeness and trust. And they want to be able to share their thoughts and their feelings. And so the assistant can be sometimes put almost between a rock and a hard place if the administration and the home in general doesn't understand that, because residents in their meetings talk about whatever they want to talk about. They only put in the minutes what they want to have put in the minutes. Subsequently, if the assistant is in the meeting, they may very well hear things that are not in the minutes of that meeting. And it makes it very, very difficult then when a supervisor or another staff member or someone comes and says, hey, I don't see this in the minutes, what was said at resident council. So confidentiality is so very important, but it can be so difficult sometimes for that assistant. The assistant also, encourages participation in resident council and, puts the posters up perhaps, however resident council would like to advertise their meetings. And the last thing on this slide is understand the legislation and the intent. And the legislation I'm speaking of in this particular case is what we are talking about, the legislation regarding the home and the residence council. Because even then, if it's understood and people are saying, why are you doing what you're doing, or why are you not doing what we think you should be doing, you can fall back on the legislation with great confidence and say, as my role of assistant or as a resident council long-term care home, here is what we can do. Now, I'm coming to the end, and I'm trying to move quickly, but the one thing that I want to point out, we talk about quality all the time, and this is one of those statutes that I took, I said we'd talk about it. This is one of the things that's right into the Act, a statute that says, every licensee of a long-term care home shall develop and implement a quality improvement and utilization review system that monitors, analyzes, evaluates, and improves the quality of accommodation, care, services, programs, and goods provided to residents of long-term care. So that's the statute. When you look at this slide, there's the 5 areas. And then if you had the Long-Term Care Homes Act in front of you, you could turn to the regulations. And it refers in the regulations back to this, and it says those improvements that you're doing must be communicated to the Residents' Council on an ongoing basis. And that's Regulation 228 if you're looking for it. So again, it's this working together. And really when you think about it, it's a marvelous idea using resident council for quality improvement, because look at the 5 areas. Accommodation, it's for the residents. It's for you, the residents. Care is given to you, the residents. Services, programs, and goods are all for the residents, and the home works on improvement for all 5 areas. So who is better to actually give feedback on how it's going, how the improvements are working, than the residents? And when I talk about resident council meetings and resident council being more than meetings, I really encourage managers and supervisors and department heads or whatever not to wait for the meeting to ask, but ask residents as you're out and about during the day how things are going. Have they noted? Is it any better? And that's quality improvement, the best kind of quality improvement you can probably get. Now, from this quality improvement, I've learned personally, it's not just the meeting, but day by day. But from speaking with residents and working with the board members, it is really, really evident that residents want to be a part of the solutions. As experts by experience, and that's a great phrase, experts by experience, they are very much aware of what is happening in their home at all hours of the day and the night. And if the relationship between the resident council and the home is active, directional, and ongoing, then the management in the long-term care home will seek out the advice from resident council and act on its recommendations and advice provided. And the resident council then is equally involved in the dialogue. Again, that respectful working relationship. Now there's a quote here, and it's from a president, I don't know which home or anything, but it is a president of the resident council who brings this point to light by saying, while living in our home, we may see things that could improve safety daily, and we may have input for suggestions. And the only thing that you would have to do in order to get the answer is simply to ask a resident. And you'll often see ask a resident buttons, and residents will be wearing them. And again, they were designed by residents, wanting residents to wear them, people to say, ask a resident, what does it mean? And it opens up that communication, how residents residents' voices can make a great deal of difference in the home. I'm not going to go through all of the powers. If you look up in the legislation, there is a number of powers of resident council. This is only a partial list, and it's only basically for the slide. But with the admission package, resident councils can develop their own brochure containing information that they'd like new residents to know about the council and the home. And having been out and about, I've seen some, and they're wonderful. Not only are they welcoming the new resident to their home, but they're also welcoming the resident to resident council because they are a member of resident council when they come into the home. Attempt to resolve disputes. The resident council is intended to be a vehicle through which disputes are resolved. It's sometimes seen as a complaining vehicle, but it's an important aspect of assuring residents that their concerns are heard. It is so important to understand they heard me. And they're involved. The residents are involved again in that resolution of issues. As I kind of touched on before, residents can certainly sponsor and plan activities, and they can raise money on their own if they want to. Advise on the operations of the home, and again, we've kind of touched on that. Advise on improvements and care and to quality, and we just kind of went over that quickly too. And to review reports, and they can be financial or inspection reports. Not all homes really want to understand everything financial, but you certainly, if you're so inclined. As an example, again, one home, when they were asking, resident council was asking for something, and the reply was always, it's not in the budget, it's not in the budget. And so they asked if someone who understood the budget could come and speak to them, and I believe it was a financial person in their home or something, and they did. And it's not that the residents managed to get what they were hoping for, but they had an understanding then as to why it was difficult to get what they were asking for. Sometimes just knowing the reasons behind things make it so much easier to live with the results. The inspection reports, and you're probably aware of this, but let me just reiterate that every time an inspector comes into the home to do an inspection, whatever the inspection is, one copy of the report goes to the president of resident council. The president does receive a copy, and then one goes to the family council and one to the administrator. And that is a really, really good time to have perhaps the administrator come in and talk about what the results were for your home. It's a difficult read sometimes to get through. So if the administrator can come in and explain what's going on and explain what their action plan is and ask the residents if they have any ideas or feedback into that action plan, that usually works very well for understanding what's going on. Now, as most of you know, OARC has worked very, very hard on tools to help resident councils, the assistants in the homes, work together. And I've just got them up on the screen here. I encourage each of you to choose a time when you can have a look at these tools and see exactly how they all work together. Hopefully you'll feel better equipped when you look at them to help resident councils move forward. I do want to point out the OARC tools, what you're seeing, are not mandated. You don't have to use them. But everything in the minutes template is mandated. So it's really worthwhile looking at and having a discussion with the resident council about. Now, I want you to know that the tools themselves, these very tools, have recently been updated. Again, keeping up with things that we have been learning here at OARC. And I really do encourage each of you to register for the September webinar with Dee Lender, our Executive Director, because she's going to delve into each one of these. And so you've kind of, from hopefully this presentation, got the foundational piece of resident council, and now you can step another step forward and learn how to use all of the things and how it all ties together. That pretty much brings me to the end of the presentation. I have talked so much, I have not even looked at this chat box. I don't know whether there are any questions or any thoughts or comments, but please, if there is anything, let me know and I will try to answer or share. And if I don't know the answer, I will try to find it and I will get back to everyone. Anything at all? Wait till I try scrolling and see if that shows me anything. Okay. Yes, yes. Someone said, is that the webinar on September the 8th? Yes, it is. And again, you know, register for it. There's no cost for it. Oh, and there's one of the homes that mentioned that they had 160 residents in their home when I was talking way back about the number of residents. One home has got 11 residents present and 1 staff. That's great. I don't. Okay. Okay, so here's one. Let me, I suppose everybody can see it, but I'm going to read it out. Earlier you said that residence council is for the residents. Absolutely. In saying that, there are certain things that the Act requires we review. If the residents aren't interested, can they vote not to discuss it, i.e. reviewing the Residents' Bill of Rights? You know, yes, if the residents have decided there is something that they don't want to do, then that's their decision. It's their home. However, that doesn't mean that all residents don't, and perhaps then if those who are interested in the Bill of Rights could either have a small group to go over things, or the residents could know ahead of time when or where or place it in the resident council meeting, that people can either come in when they want or leave when they want if really they're not that interested. But I'll give you an example. The Residents' Bill of Rights sometimes, again, it's just something else that's a little bit hard to grasp sometimes, and not everyone can manage to understand what they're saying. So that's the job of the assistant, to really help with the facilitation of that kind of discussion and to draw it out. And I don't know whether you're using a Clio booklet or anything like that, but to use very layman's terms so people can understand it. It's hard sometimes to read the legal jargon and that type of thing. So I suggest, yes, if that's what the residents have decided for those residents, then no. But if there's other residents who are interested, then I think fair negotiation should take place. Did that sound reasonable? Let me see what I've got here. Yes, we do use the Clio booklet. Do you find it helpful, Karen? Are you finding it helpful? Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. And just for anybody that perhaps isn't, I don't know whether you would be or not, it is available. It's free of charge. And what I've learned from talking to different homes is quite often that is given out perhaps with that brochure or with other welcoming information to the residents. So each new resident in the home receives a Clio booklet with their rights when they arrive. You're very welcome, Maxwell Manor. It was wonderful to spend my time with each and every one of you today. Anything else? Someone else says perhaps the executive could make it more interactive for residents and there'd be some interest. I think this again is going back to the residents' rights. Let me share one of the homes, the ways that they deal with it. They take the 27 rights, they cut them into 27 pieces of paper. So each right is on a piece of paper. They fold each one of those pieces of paper up and put it into like either a basket or a fishbowl or something like that. And when the resident's right comes up onto the agenda, someone, and all they have to be able to do is reach in and pull out one of the pieces of paper. And if that resident who managed to do that can't manage to open and read, that's okay. It can go on to someone else who can open and read. And then when that's discussed and done with, that piece of paper is left, and the next meeting or the next person, however the resident council has set it up, will read the next right. And quite often it takes a year, but you'll get through pretty much all 27. And people who perhaps aren't able to actively and verbally participate in the meetings do have a role and are able to do their own thing at the meeting. Okay? Okay, is there any other, oh, here we go, let me see. Okay, so this has been asked. Okay, live in a well-run home, but many residents have varying degrees of dementia. Consequently, attendance is very low and participation is limited. Are there ways to improve this? And I think probably most homes are finding that. And I do recommend, I know back in the day, everything that was done in the home, the success was judged on the number of residents who attended. It had nothing to do much with quality. It had nothing to do with much else except numbers. And so yes, the attendance at resident council, as far as residents attending the meeting, is probably becoming smaller. I do suggest that for those who want to attend, that they get the opportunity, even if they're not that vocal or active in the meeting, that if it is known that yes, they want to attend, just because someone is sitting with their eyes closed does not mean they're sleeping. But I also suggest you don't bring people who aren't able to sit comfortably for an hour, or who struggle to maintain focus on the presentation. I do recommend, I just mentioned about the residents' rights and how that's one way that a person could actively participate. Another thing is some different floors or units have people who they chat with and bring that information from the units to a resident council. Families are often chatted with when they see them in the halls, not that it's family council or anything like that, but that's one of the ways that that information, perhaps from residents who aren't able to speak for themselves, are coming in. One of the other things that I heard was a resident, and what this resident was really skilled at doing was walking. She was really, really good at walking. And so she accompanied the assistant, the resident council assistant, as the resident council assistant went around and posted those minutes on the board. And that was the job of that resident every month, to make sure that the postings were up to date with resident council minutes. So don't focus. I mean, don't focus too much on the numbers at your resident council meeting. Focus on the quality and on the work, and keep those other folks in thought at every meeting you have. I'm just scrolling through to see. Okay, so how do other resident councils assistants communicate issues with various management? Do they use email or deadline? That might be a really good discussion for resident council assistants. I'm sure that it is as different in each home as the homes themselves. But don't forget, it's the residents who are going to communicate these issues. A resident council could decide perhaps how they would like to have the issues, or the minutes perhaps. If the issues are in the minutes, that's great, because then everyone gets to see how the whole meeting. But perhaps one of the residents would like to go with the assistant and actually either give the minutes to the administrator, have it put in his or her mailbox. Others might be quite fine with using email. But again, assistants, please involve resident council. And residents may not know all the options that there are. So it might need to be a bit of a discussion, and let residents decide how they would like their information to be spread through the home. The other thing that I didn't mention, and I really should, is about the posted minutes. Residents can decide not to post their minutes, and it's important that you know that. Automatically, people think that, oh yeah, and the resident council minutes are going to go here. Minutes only go up, they're only posted on a bulletin board with the consent of resident council. I have to be quite honest, in all the homes that I have visited, I have only met one resident council who doesn't post their minutes. I'm not too sure why it was done that way, but that's what resident council decided. But again, posting those minutes are a decision that resident council makes. Okay, in response, we've got a response. Thank you to Owen Penning. In our home, we use a response form. Then I email to the responding manager. It indicates the date of the meeting, the date, and the date by which they must respond. I can send you a copy if you email me. Thank you very much for sharing that. Again, I am going to really encourage everyone to come to the next webinar. Dee will talk about the importance of perhaps using the minutes as that vehicle to share information back and forth, and how it is important that the licensee or the administrator gets the information. So I'm gonna leave it at that for now, but I really do encourage. I think if you're asking that question, you will get your answers for sure on September the 8th. But thank you very much for sharing. Well, I think our time is just about up, and I think if I've done it right, I've got through just about all of this chat. So the very last thing I would like to say is thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending the webinar. If you have any thoughts or ideas on, what could be added to it or that, please don't hesitate. It's been a pleasure for me, and no doubt we'll get talking to you on another day, each of you. Thank you and goodbye.